Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Skip Backus. I'm CEO here at Omega Institute. And welcome to all of you that are on Zoom and Facebook Live to another of our Omega conversations. We started conversations when we were deep in the COVID pandemic as a way to stay in touch and still address some important topics. And we've been really pleasantly surprised by the response. People from all over the world. At one point, we had over 52 countries represented. And so very, very exciting way to speak and reach out to everyone. If we have time today, we'll do a few questions. So if you want to put them in the chat, that would be great. This conversation is being recorded and will be available on demand on our website. So when I was thinking about the topic for today, I wound up finding myself going back to my high school days. I was 17 and on a Saturday night date at the movies. The movie was The Graduate, and one of my favorite movie lines happened between Mr. McGuire and Ben, played by Dustin Hoffman.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Yeah, that's right. So today's conversation is about plastics. And that date night was back, feels like yesterday, but it was back in 1967. And at that point, we were producing 25 million tons of plastic. Today, our annual plastic production is roughly about 475 million tons. Over that same period of time, we've produced 9 billion tons of plastic. So I'm very excited today for this conversation because I don't think there's anyone more qualified to speak to the enormous challenge of plastic production and plastic pollution than our guest today, Judith Enck. Judith is an environmental policy expert and has held top influential positions in the state and federal government, was appointed by President Obama and served as the regional administrator. Yeah, there's the photograph in the background you can see up over her head. Thank you for the lean there, Judith. And overseeing the environmental protection agencies in New York, New Jersey, 8 Indian nations, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, all in addition to managing a staff of over 800 and a $700 million budget. She also served as Deputy Secretary for the Environment in New York State Governor's Office and Policy Advisor to the New York State Attorney General. She was Senior Environmental Associate with the New York State Public Interest Research Group and past President of Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. Judith founded Beyond Plastics in 2019 to end plastic pollution through education, advocacy, and institutional change. Passionate about protecting public health and the environment, she teaches classes on public pollution, on plastic pollution there, and as a senior fellow at Bennington College. So welcome, Judith.
Great to be with you, Skip. I love Omega, and I loved that very soothing introductory music, and I think we're about to kind of change the mood a little.
Yes, I think so. Let's just jump in because an hour is short around this topic for sure. So maybe just start us off by where do we stand with plastics that led you to creating an organization such as Beyond Plastics?
Well, I established Beyond Plastics after I left the EPA. The good thing about being appointed to your job in the federal government by the president, and in my case, President Obama, is you know when your last day on the job is. It's when he leaves, unless you really screw up and they fire you, which remarkably didn't happen during my almost 8 years at the EPA. So I had a lot of time to really research and reflect and figure out what do I want to do next. And I'm always looking for crucially important environmental issues where there is an unmet need. So obviously, my mind went toward climate change, and plastic pollution is a climate change issue. Mm-hmm. But I also really care a lot about environmental justice. I care about oceans. I care about rivers like the Hudson River. I care about recycling. I care about health. I want to make sure toxic chemicals are not making us sick. And remarkably, all of those issues are wrapped together on the issue of plastic production, use, and disposal. And I looked around, where can I do that work? And I decided, making money is overrated. Why don't I become an academic? So I was very fortunate to be hired by Bennington College in Southern Vermont, where I teach classes on plastic pollution and other topics. And then in the other 20 hours of the day, I work to build our wonderful project called Beyond Plastics, which is a national project with the goal of eliminating plastic pollution everywhere. And we're really serious about that. Sometimes people hear the goal and they chuckle a little, but no community anywhere in the country or the world deserves to be dealing with the large volume of plastic pollution that we find in our environment.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can certainly understand how it's people react in a humorous way to it, because it is such an overwhelming issue. And I especially like when you start weaving together how everything is interconnected this way, because we have the Omega Center for Sustainable Living here at Omega, where we deal with the built environment and wastewater. And one of the things that we have found is you cannot separate any of these issues. No matter how you look at them, you always find yourself dealing with all the points of connection that come from the idea of really understanding what it means to be sustainable. Just to start out, again, a little bit of research from last night. When I was home, I was looking at, all right, let's look at plastic in Skip's house. And, I was going through and I opened up the drawer and there's saran wrap, and so, I know, thank you. So it's everywhere. Our interactions with plastic are just constant, nonstop. And one of the things that was really confusing, and I checked with my local hauler, and they basically say, oh, you put all the plastic in there. And the reality is that's not true. All plastic does not get recycled. And then there's all of these numbers, on the plastic. And then there's some things, like a lot of to-go containers, have no numbers. So what's the deal with the numbers and what actually gets recycled?
Well, it's not surprising that so many people are confused about plastic recycling, because the chemical companies and the fossil fuel companies that make plastic have created that confusion on purpose. They have lulled us into this false sense of, if you just put everything that's plastic into your recycling bin, you don't have to worry about it. And that is just fundamentally false. Recycling has a very low, plastic has a very low recycling rate, especially compared to other materials. For instance, paperboard and cardboard has about a 66% recycling rate, glass about 27%, ferrous metals 33%. But plastic in the United States has an abysmal recycling rate of 8.5%. So over 90% of plastics are not recycled. You should only be recycling containers that say number 1 or number 2. That's actually the resin number. And it's it's tiny font size on the bottom of the packaging. Do not put any other plastics in your recycling bin, even if your waste hauler tells you to do, because what they are telling you is they think we're not smart. And they're wrong on that. We're kind of smart. At least you're smart. And the waste haulers and some local governments don't want to confuse people. So they say, put all the plastics in your recycling bin, and they don't get recycled. What happens is they go to a recycling center, they're manually sorted. So anything besides number 1 and number 2 plastic is actually buried in a landfill or burned in an incinerator, or even worse, sometimes municipalities or waste haulers will collect all of that waste plastic, not number 1 and number 2, and they will ship it to other countries, causing immense pollution problems there. For the longest time, China took 50% of the US and European Union recyclables, but there's so much non-recyclables in what we were sending to China. China said, hold on, we don't want American or European recyclables anymore. So what is the US and Europe doing? Sending waste plastic that's really not recyclable to countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, and now Africa. So, a lot of people do what I call wish cycling. They wish you could recycle it, so they put it in the bin. Don't do that. On plastic, and I want you to keep recycling, cardboard, glass, metal, but on plastic, only number 1 and number 2. And the most important message is if you can avoid using single-use plastic packaging, do everything you can to avoid it. There are a couple communities that will take number 5, including the tiny city of New York City. But most communities around the country, only number 1 or number 2 plastic, and you flip the container over and you see it on the bottom.
So, what happens? So when you get a to-go meal that's in one of those black containers, doesn't the color have some telltale sign that you've got a problem already?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned black plastic. That never gets recycled. Because when the material goes to a recycling center or a material recovery facility, a lot of them use optical scanners. None of them recognize black plastic. So never put black plastic in your recycling bin. And, for the longest time, I would save all of those takeout containers and use them again, but don't do that. Definitely do not put plastic in the microwave, and do not put it in your dishwasher if you're using hot water, because chemicals in the plastic will leach. Polystyrene is not recyclable at all. And in New York State, effective January of the coming year, polystyrene foam for food packaging will be banned, as is the case in about 7 other states.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting topic there because, one of the 3 R's is reuse. And so you think about with plastic, well, I'll just keep reusing this. And the reality is that's not what you want to be doing. And
no, it's very painful. But if I ever get my hands on black plastic, I use it once and then I throw it in the garbage, as painful as that is. Or you can reuse it, but not for anything food related. You can organize your junk drawer and put everything in those containers, or you can, I'm giving you a glimpse into my fashion sense, but I store my earrings in old egg cartons. So, think of non-food uses for plastic.
Right. Well, there's so many sites now coming up with alternatives to plastic in terms of storage bags, utensils, and everything. And my tennis shorts are made out of plastic, recycled plastic. So there are a lot of ways to, work your lifestyle into plastic. The China conversation, though, is that where the 10 rivers story comes from? What's that thing about 10 rivers?
There are 10 rivers all over the country, mostly in Asia, where there's so much plastic in the environment, it washes into rivers and then gets into the ocean. And that's the major source of plastic in the ocean, but certainly not the only source. If you're walking down the street in Poughkeepsie and you have a plastic water bottle in your hand and somehow it gets away from you, it gets littered, it rains, it goes into the storm drain, good chance it's going to make it into the Hudson River. It goes down the Hudson River into the Atlantic Ocean. The plastic water bottle is brittle because it's exposed to sunlight in the ocean. And then the ocean waves act almost like a paper shredder. So you have one plastic water bottle that can become hundreds or thousands of little pieces of plastic. It'll eventually become microplastic, which is tiny pieces of plastic, like the size of a grain of salt, 5 millimeters or less. Then that microplastic is eaten by sea life and eventually people. So, we don't have clean hands in the United States, but what a lot of the plastic companies are saying are, oh, that's not really a domestic problem. It's a problem in Asia. And we just need to build landfills and incinerators in Asia to take care of it. No, we need to turn off the tap, and we need to stop exporting waste plastic to other countries. The United States is one of a small number of countries that have not signed what's called the Basel Convention on International Waste Trade. We just should not be exporting plastics where it becomes a headache to other nations.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. One of the things here at Omega is we're striving to be a no waste campus. And
I've noticed that. It's great.
Yeah, just dealing with the consumer side of plastics and really watching what happens here. Some of the things just amaze me, that the number of people that still are buying water in plastic bottles. And then the bottle sits outside in the sun. And to me, that's almost like a toxic cocktail.
Yeah, or it sits in their car and it gets really hot. And when it gets hot, you get some of the chemicals leaching. You also get microplastics in drinking water, bottled water. When you just turn the bottle cap, which is plastic, little bits of microplastic are known to fall into the water that you then consume. Yeah. You might be surprised to know that you and I, each of us, either inhale or consume a credit card worth of size piece of plastic every week. So the equivalent, so take out your credit card, look at it, that equivalent size, we are either breathing in or consuming every single week.
Yeah. Well, I read that over the course of a lifetime, we consume more than 40 pounds of plastic. And that now when we look at the general state of health, one of the things that's finally seriously being considered is the impact of plastic on internal organs and the accumulated burden that's put on them, trying to just deal with all of the chemicals that make up that plastic. But, so where are some of the places that we would encounter microplastics? I mean, I know about, we're dealing with storm runoff in our parking lot, and how do we deal with the toxins from vehicles? So you have the oils, the greases, the brake pads, but the biggest thing you have is the tires. And so what are other sources of microplastics that we would?
So many. Tires, when you get the abrasion of the tires, there's a lot of plastic in tires.
Right.
So tires is a source of microplastic. Clothing, especially if it's made from recycled plastic, when you wash it. Yeah, I'm not shaming you, Skip. I know we all think we're doing something good by buying clothing made from old plastic, but then when you put it in your washing machine, it's going to shed some microplastics. There's microplastic in beer. There's microplastic in seafood, particularly seafood that you eat whole, like shrimp, oysters, mussel. There's microplastic in sea mist. You're standing at the ocean. It's a beautiful moment. The sun is going down. You're smelling the sea mist. You're also breathing microplastics from sea mist. There's a great new scientific report by Dr. Janice Brainey at the University of Utah. She's an expert on dust. She's a fascinating woman. I love her work. Yeah. She studies dust. And she went to a remote area in national parks out west to find out what's in dust in national parks. She was surprised to find a lot of plastics. Yeah. The other place we find microplastics is in our bodies. And I want to really commend this book called Countdown by Dr. Shauna Swan. May is Women's Health Month. And Dr. Shauna Swan and her co-author, Stacy Colino, have written this important book about toxins and reproductive health. And she has a whole chapter on plastics. And so I just want to mention that my organization, Beyond Plastics, is organizing a webinar for her to speak All of the information is on beyondplastics.org. You can just register there for free. We have Dr. Shauna Swan speaking about reproductive toxins, and also this amazing Italian researcher, Dr. Ragusa, who with a team of Italian researchers, this is going to really concern people. His scientific paper that was just published in January documented for the first time the presence of microplastics in the human placenta on both the fetal side and the maternal side. We know plastics are in our body. We just don't know precisely what it is doing to us. But I would argue it's not doing anything good. But the medical research is not particularly advanced. There's one study, very, very small sample size, and this is going to just sound yucky, but microplastics in human poop, 100%. So we're pooping it out. It's in the guts of our, it's in our guts. And what is it doing to our health? We don't exactly know. Yeah.
What about, one of the things that I always tell people when I do the tours of the Eco Machine at Omega and relationship to water is that everything that you put on your skin is the same as if you're eating it. So isn't there a lot of microplastic, like the skin abrasive treatments and all of?
Yeah, one of the few bills, important environmental bills that passed during the Obama administration was one that required the reduction of microbeads in personal care products. It used to be when you had that thing you put on your face. I don't put anything on my face. I don't know the right words, but some skincare thing. It used to be made of like finely chopped walnut shells. So it was an abrasive.
Yeah.
What?
Oatmeal also.
Yeah, and oatmeal. And then that switched to microplastics. Who thought of that? We didn't get to vote on that, and we're putting it on our faces.
Right.
So Obama advanced this great bill that passed through Congress, reducing microplastics in some consumer products, also in toothpaste. There's microplastics in some toothpaste. And then, that all goes down the drain. So there's a lot more work to do. It's not as extensive a ban as it needs to be. But I think it also reminds us that even if you're super careful, your personal choices are not going to protect you adequately. And it's also not going to protect the planet. So we need institutional change in addition to personal consumer choices. Yeah.
And I'm just thinking now how I have to go home and take out all my tennis shorts and do away.
Just don't wash them a lot.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, but it brings me to here at Omega, I'm always trying to really look into how we do what we do. So we just bought some chairs that are for Adirondack chairs for outside that are made from recycled plastics. It's a wood that's now used in Trex decking, all kinds of products. How is that? Is that actually a good? I'm trying to understand, how do we actually reuse plastic in a way that is beneficial, because the stuff is here.
Yeah, no, I think that is okay and applauded. I would not, you have to get the toxics out of plastics before you can really reuse it for another food purpose. But I think using it for Adirondack chairs that presumably will last a couple decades is fine. I should say I'm not against all plastic use. I do want to talk about plastic production, which might get me to opposing all plastic use, but right. I think chairs are fine. Car bumpers makes cars lighter and more fuel efficient. But you're not finding Adirondack chairs and car bumpers on the side of the road or at beaches as a source of litter. Right. So about 40% of plastic is used for packaging, and that's where we can do significantly better. And that's the major source of litter, along with cigarette butts. If the cigarettes have filters, Like if you open it up, it looks like a little piece of cotton almost. It's actually plastic in the filter. And the number one item found during litter cleanups are cigarette butts. And now we're seeing electronic cigarette cartridges and e-cigarettes littered all over city streets. And when it rains, it goes right into the sewer. And I just, New York State just passed a bill legalizing recreational cannabis. And I tried to get the state legislature to require environmental standards for that packaging because that's mostly packaged in plastic.
Right.
So now we're going to have a whole new universe of plastic waste on city streets, in parks. The smaller it is, the harder it is to control.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go back to one of the things that, about good plastics, because,
that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, I don't, this is one of the things I want to talk with you about, because certainly, we've probably everyone on this talk today has seen some of the screenshots of the hospitals with COVID and so forth. And literally, you cannot be in a hospital without being surrounded by plastic. So, it is serving a purpose. It is being utilized in a way that has, at least in its usage, value. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with finding the right home for how we relate to plastic? Because I don't, as much as I love, the opening comment where you said, people tend to chuckle a little bit when you say you want to get, it's going to be very difficult to imagine a culture without plastic. So how do we find the way to good plastic?
Yeah, I'll work with you on this. Just stop calling it good plastic, and I'll explain why. I did not mean to snap at you during your webinar, but valuable plastic, useful plastic.
Okay.
So
I yield.
Yes, COVID has reminded us how much plastic is particularly used in the medical profession. And you look at something like hospital gowns or gowns you'll put on when you go to the doctor. Well, that can be cloth and it can be reusable. At one time, hospitals had big commercial laundry operations. Just like you probably, when you have a fancy event at Omega, you probably have cloth tablecloths rather than, single-use plastic or paper. Right. So, we don't always need a giant breakthrough. Sometimes it's just like having commercial laundries. For masks, remember, in the beginning was all disposable masks. Now a lot of people use reusable masks that you can put in the laundry. So it's a bunch of those little steps. And even in the medical field, we need to reduce the use of plastic because of the way plastic is produced. Traditionally, plastic was made from chemicals and oil, not a good mix. Now it's made from chemicals and ethane, which is a waste byproduct of hydrofracking. So I really should be always referring to fracked plastics. Plastic and fracking is now married, like forever. It's a very unhappy marriage. But 99% of plastics made today are made from a variety of chemicals and a byproduct of fracking. And what's happening is typically you would go to a fracking well pad and this ethane gas would be vented into the atmosphere. What we're seeing now is new pipelines are being constructed to send the ethane to these brand new multi-billion-dollar ethane cracker facilities. Most people have never heard of it. They're run by little mom and pop companies like Shell and ExxonMobil. Right. And what they do is they heat the ethane to high temperature and then they crack it. That's why it's called a cracking facility. And then it becomes the main ingredient for single-use plastic packaging, things like polystyrene and bags and water bottles. Big problem is that these facilities emit massive amounts of air toxics, and they are super emitters of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas.
Mm-hmm.
So two big problems there. People live near these facilities.
Yeah.
Usually these are low-income people, communities of color. So they are being exposed to air toxics from the facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have massive amounts of carbon dioxide being emitted into the air. In fact, if plastic production grows the way it is predicted, by 2030, the carbon dioxide emissions from these ethane cracker facilities will be the equivalent of 295 coal-fired power plants. So we're working hard to shut down coal-fired power plants because of climate change concerns. And what has happened is the fossil fuel industry has identified plastic production as their plan B. They know that their market will be reduced for transportation because we're getting electric cars, where hopefully the Biden infrastructure bill passes, we get more money for mass transit, walkable, bikeable communities.
Right.
So less petroleum needed for vehicles. And then on the electricity side, we're seeing a rebirth in not just renewable energy like solar and wind and geothermal, but also a real interest in energy efficiency. So our friends at Dow Chemical and ExxonMobil and Shell see their market going down. So just like the Dustin Hoffman movie, they've said the future is plastics. And there are enormous environmental justice implications and climate change implications associated with plastic production. So even for the Adirondack chair, you're using that ethane cracker process. It's a lot of chemicals, it's a lot of fracked gas, it's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, again, how everything is connected, how in New York State there was, all of the work done to really stay out of the fracking business. And yet the actual products of fracking, still don't know the state line. And so, on the one hand, you think, oh, we've dealt with fracking. And on the other hand, no, you haven't, because you're not looking at the entire cycle.
Right. Any power plants in New York, like Cricket Valley in Dutchess County and Danskammer, if you hear of a power plant using gas, it's fracked gas. And so it's terrific that Governor Cuomo did not allow fracking to physically happen in New York, but we have to close the circle and stop using fracked gas, and certainly not relying on fracked gas for plastics.
Yeah. It's interesting. After I listened to you at Williams, I went on the website and just wanted to explore that very point about to the petroleum industry. And what I found is, and this is the thing about, social media right now, there are many platforms that are put up about, really building plastic up as the solution for the future. And when you just dig down and you watch all of it and you get to the end, they're all produced by organizations that are totally and directly affiliated with the petroleum industry. So there is a major effort to continue to develop this area. And that brings me to the topic of social activism and legislation. And part of what has happened, I know there's a bill that was introduced. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
Sure. Yeah. I mean, people should be vigilant about not purchasing and using plastic, but that's not going to get us out of the soup. We still have 15 million tons of plastic entering the ocean every year. And so this is an emergency. We need systemic change. And to get that, we need a federal bill to pass in Congress called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. It is the most comprehensive federal bill ever introduced that actually does the sensible thing of turning off the tap of plastic production. It skips the whole myth of plastic recycling because recycling rates are so low, and it really focuses on prevention. So one thing it does is it puts a 3-year pause on new plastic production facilities being constructed. We currently have 47 ethane cracker facilities in some stage of permitting. mostly in Texas, Louisiana, and Ohio. So we need to hit pause on that. Another key component of this bill, it's a national bottle bill, just like New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut have minimum deposits on beverage containers. Only 9 states have that. So we need a national bottle bill. It also bans plastic bags. It bans polystyrene food packaging. You only get a plastic straw if you ask for one, which significantly reduces the use of plastic straws. There are many other key elements to the bill, but as you can imagine, it is vigorously opposed by the fossil fuel industry and the chemical industry. So we need people power behind this bill. It's Senate Bill 984, sponsored by Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, and it's House Bill HR 2238. And when we're done, I'll type it in the chat. HR 2238 by Representative Lowenthal. The good news is in New York, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand signed on as a co-sponsor, along with the Omega House member, Antonio Delgado, is a co-sponsor. Senator Schumer says he supports it, but he's not a co-sponsor. So we really need phone calls and letters into Senator Schumer's office. And wherever you live, please call your U.S. Senator. You've got 2 of them, unless you're in Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands, or Washington, D.C. You have 2 U.S. senators and you have 1 House member, and you want to adopt them and you want to convince them to co-sponsor the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, because it is our best chance to reduce the overproduction, use, and disposal of plastic. We haven't really talked about disposal, but if plastic is burned at a garbage incinerator, like the one operating in Poughkeepsie, New York, right on the Hudson River, incinerator operators love to get their hands on plastic because it's fossil fuel. You're burning fossil fuel. But when you burn plastic, you get dioxin emissions into the air. So you definitely do not want plastic going to incinerators, but it happens all over the country. It's a terrific bill. It's going to be hard to pass, but not impossible. So that is your homework assignment for this afternoon. If you think plastic is a problem and if you think this is a good approach, please contact your U.S. senators and your House member.
Yeah, so that's great. The next thing I was going to ask you, and I'm going to put that right as number 1 on the list, is, what are the top 5 things, if you will, that somebody should do in their relationship to plastic? And I'm going to leave as number 1 that one that we just finished talking about, because this is such an ingrained, deep issue in our culture that I think we could recycle ourselves forever, and it's not going to really make the kind of change that's necessary, because we have to move the process forward to where there's actually more of a closed loop thinking about what it is we're actually producing and the impacts all along the way, especially as we think about the general category of wellness. And, you list about the dioxins from the incinerator plants and all of these various things. And we're living with this every day.
Right.
And there is a cost. And there's a cost that's translated not only into our own health, but also into the economy. And it's, I think, totally 100% underestimated in its impact. So if you were to say that here's, I forget who did this, Jay Leno or somebody, the top 10 things or whatever, but, what are the top things that someone should pay attention to? And I'm going to leave number 1 again as work with your legislation.
Yes. So I'm going to disappoint your Omega listeners, and I'm not going to say things like bring reusable bags to the store and use reusable coffee mugs and, look in your refrigerator, see what you're typically using for plastic. In our house, we used a lot of plastic bottles for orange juice, and I switched to frozen concentrate juice to avoid plastic. I'm not going to talk about making your own toothpaste, and I'm not going to talk about getting more reusables in your personal life. That's really, really important. We're only going to get out of this with sustained political action. So number 1, support the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Second, we need to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. And President O'Biden, I was combining
That's
Obama.
right. I messed up a few words today too, so let's.
So President Biden has said he wants to stop fossil fuel subsidies and he wants to stop fracking on federal land. That's good. I think it should also stop on private land. So getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies. Third, just get really smart on the issue. Get smart on the issue of plastics and also climate change. So on climate change, read anything written by Bill McKibben, a wonderful author who writes for The New Yorker, and he has a couple really good books on climate change. Read anything by Elizabeth Colbert, Jeff Goodall with Rolling Stone. So get really smart yourself. It's easy. There's a lot of good information out there. Number 4, financially support groups that are working on this issue. There's not a lot of us. There are groups like the Plastic Pollution Coalition. There's a wonderful little group in New York City called Cafeteria Culture, working on plastics in public school cafeterias. There's my organization, beyondplastics.org. We're, don't tell anyone. We're kind of small. We're four feisty women who are taking on the world. And I just love it when some business will call me and ask if my team is going to be at the Petrochem Expo in Houston. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure who from the team might be there. We don't really have a team, There are 4 of us working 6 days a week around the clock. And I agree, 4 feisty women at the kitchen table is all it takes.
Right.
So support Beyond Plastics, financially support groups that are working on this issue. And the 5th thing is we have to get big money out of politics. Fossil fuel companies and chemical companies dominate decision-making at the local, the state, and the federal level. I work with lots of community groups and local elected officials who want to pass local bills to reduce plastic. So we drafted a great model bill. It's on our website. It's called the Plastic Trifecta, because it deals with 3 big sources of plastic litter: straws, polystyrene foam, and bags. And I can't think of a better name than the Plastic Trifecta. So if you got a better name, send it to me. So I'll often, in the olden days when we met in person, I'll drive to some tiny town in the Northeast to testify at a hearing. And there's always an army of plastics lobbyists there. They're usually from the American Chemistry Council. They usually start their testimony saying, I just flew in from Washington, which makes everyone laugh a little.
Right.
And
I just did. So
and then they proceed not to tell the truth. Okay. They say, don't ban plastics. We can recycle it. They've been saying that for 40 years. So the good thing is that they don't have very convincing arguments, but the bad thing is they're everywhere. They make campaign contributions. They have armies of lobbyists. But to quote Patti Smith's song, the people have the power. And I firmly believe that. Beyond Plastics is taking on a new issue. If you live in New York City, we've learned that the supermarket chain Gristedes and D'Agostino's is still handing out plastic bags at the checkout, even though state law prohibits that. So that those 2 supermarket companies own 28 supermarkets. So it's not like it's a corner bodega. Right. So this week we are launching this great grassroots campaign to get Gristedes and D'Agostino's to simply follow the law. We're not going to convince them. So we're trying to get the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Attorney General, Letitia James, to actually enforce the plastic bag ban. And there's no excuse for them not enforcing the law. So if you go to beyondplastics.org, there are lots of handy little tools that you can use to send an email message to the Attorney General and the Cuomo administration, urging them to enforce the law. The only reason these stores are breaking the law is because plastic bags are cheap And one reason plastic bags are cheap is to go, I was going to bring this home, Skip, is my
That's
number
okay.
one reason.
I'm with you.
The number one reason is because of fossil fuel subsidies,
Yeah.
and companies not using a lot of recycled plastic.
Yeah.
Virgin plastic is cheap because of fossil fuel subsidies. So they do not consider the externalities of plastic.
Yeah.
They put all this plastic material on the market, and then they wipe their hands of it and say, you taxpayers, you consumers, take care of it. And then if I could offer item number 6, you should watch the movie, The Story of Plastic. And there's a website, thestoryofplastic.org, which in a very compelling way tells the story of what happens when plastic is produced in low-income communities of color, and also what happens when millions of tons of plastic is exported to other countries that don't have the solid waste infrastructure to handle this. I teach a class on plastic pollution at Bennington College. We now offer it online. You're all invited to take it. We're going to offer it again September 1st. And I always have the students watch The Story of Plastic. I've watched it many times, and I learned something. I can't say I learned something new, but something hits me really hard. Just watching how we are exporting massive amounts of plastic to other countries where low-income people called waste pickers are going through piles of solid waste looking for recyclables and to market. And most of the plastic you don't have a recycling market for. So this is very, as you say, this is all connected. It's international, it's environmental justice, it's health, it's climate change, it's rivers and oceans, and it's about people standing together to make change.
Yeah, and thank you for making the list of the components that you did. So, and I think really this is something that I absolutely believe is the component of educating yourself, so that you can act from clarity and strength. So you have to take the time to really step in and do your research, understand it, and reach out to organizations that are really the best allies to have are those organizations that are really working in the cause. So maybe I think I'm going to switch over and see if I can pull some things out of the chat for a minute now. So here's one. If you wash the bags, like for storing garments or whatever, does that get rid of microplastics, and is that enough to be able to reuse the material? If you wash the bags, okay, so you're rinsing them.
If you have plastic bags, it's better to reuse them, and unless you spill stuff in it, you don't even have to wash them. So if contraband gets into your house and there's plastic bags, you definitely should reuse them. Doesn't everyone have a drawer in their house with like 100 plastic bags in it? So do reuse it. Yes.
Yeah. Are they recyclable anywhere, those bags?
Yeah. Plastic film has about a 5.5% recycling rate. You can drop it off at some supermarkets. They have little bins where you can voluntarily drop off plastic bags. I try to avoid plastic bags at all cost, but I have plastic bread bags. I have frozen fruit that comes in plastic bags. And so I drop it off at my local supermarket in the bin.
Yeah. Here's a question. And this one, I have found myself caught in much because my background is in general contracting and construction. And what do you think about luxury vinyl floors and construction products that are made out of plastics?
Not much, especially vinyl. I would avoid vinyl, and you should watch this great movie by the brilliant filmmaker Judith Enck called Blue Vinyl. And again, it focuses on vinyl production in Louisiana. So it's not just about what does it do to us if it's in our house, how do you dispose of it? It's also the production side. You've got to look at the whole life cycle. And if vinyl catches on fire, like vinyl siding of your home, that is a real air toxic threat, particularly for firefighters. I'm really concerned about the very significant increase in cancer among firefighters. And I personally believe a lot of that has to do with the massive amount of plastic and vinyl and plastic in home construction and items in our home. You know, these poor firefighters show up to help save the day and save lives, and they're breathing in all of this toxic smoke.
Yeah.
And it is a real problem.
Yeah. Well, you know, I have two granddaughters now, and I'm amazed at the industry for toys for children is basically just a plastic nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I made a mistake, and I bought this one thing with the cars that go around, and it's really a lot of fun to watch the cars.
Oh yeah, I love
fun.
that.
They have great fun with it, but I was trying to find any marking on it anywhere that would say what I could do with it once they grow up and they have no interest in it anymore. And there isn't anything I can, you know, it goes to a landfill, and, you know, a million years from now, it's still, you know, there. And, you know, so I think our choices around things, our everyday choices, while insignificant by themselves, are part of how we can create an internal core alignment, so that, you know, we're actually practicing what we've learned and advocating for. So I think there's connections there.
Absolutely. So, like, I give you a hard time saying it's not about your personal choices. I do everything humanly possible to avoid plastic, but I still have a lot of plastic in my house and in my life. And so we shouldn't feel guilty about it. We should work toward institutional change, avoid it when we can. I also want to make sure that the plastic issue isn't where organic food was 25 years ago, where only affluent people, you know, can 25 years ago, only affluent people could buy a lot of organic food. And right now, if you're looking for non-plastic consumer goods, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff online, refillables and reusables. There's one company called Loop, where they send you these great food products in metal containers, and then you send it back. Well, I can't really afford those products. They're really expensive.
Yeah.
So we have to really mainstream alternatives to plastics so that everyone is afforded the opportunity to avoid plastic, particularly for food packaging.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting going back to the conversation about, you know, the role of government in this. You know, one of the chats that's up right now is that there's a bubble wrap production plant coming to town in Dutchess County.
Yes, in Poughkeepsie, right?
What a nightmare. Received IDA tax breaks and so forth and so on. So it's an example of, you know, where we're sort of, our tax dollars are digging the hole deeper.
Yes. Yeah, there's an incredible disconnect, and plastics companies do rely a lot on government subsidies. My good friend John Mylod, one of the few commercial fishermen still in the Hudson, sent me that article, and I was just like, you know, and what do we do? You know, the county is pretty determined to subsidize it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we call our county legislators and the county executive, and we weigh in Dutchess County. That's what we do.
Yeah, well, you know, this is the thing about, you know, not to get too far off of plastics and into politics, but, you know, local politics is critically important. And, you know, a lot of times it's thought of as Washington, but it can start right in your town, because before you know it, that kind of thing happens where you have some incentive plant that has a vision that is not a complete vision. It's seen through the lens of either strict economic development in the area, employment, et cetera, without considering the, you know, ancillary impacts that will come by locating that plant in a particular area. And as you say, I don't know where that one is going to be located particularly, but I could take a good chance at a guess.
Right, exactly. And imagine if Dutchess County, who wants to create jobs, took the same amount of money and gave it to restaurants for refill and reuse.
Mhm.
That would create jobs, and that would reduce the amount of solid waste going to the Dutchess County incinerator on the Hudson River. So
Mhm.
we need county executives and county planners and economic development agencies to really look holistically and not just say, oh, here's 20 new jobs. Well, what if we had the same investment and we invested in reuse and refill? We would be doing our communities a much greater service looking that way.
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of other movies. One is a PBS Frontline special called Plastic Wars.
Love it. It's
And
kind of
another one, Plastic Ocean. I haven't seen it. I don't know that one at all.
me either.
So we're getting close now to our wrapping up our time. And what gives you hope in this?
Oh, man. I guess the involvement of young people on the climate change issue. And I teach a lot of great students at Bennington College. They take my on-campus class on plastic pollution. They are filled with good ideas and commitment. I think the next generation knows what's at stake. And so what gives me hope is the growing environmental awareness of young people. And also, there's a small number of entrepreneurs who are doing cutting edge work, giving us refillable and reusable products. They're just not scaling up quickly enough. So they need more financing. They need more support. We're going to launch a new project at Beyond Plastics to try to get Meals on Wheels programs to shift to reusable packaging. The wonderful organization Meals on Wheels serves over 2 million meals a day. So talk about scaling up. And there's like an automatic return loop. And Meals on Wheels is really controlled locally. So that's an issue people can get involved in. So we're looking for local solutions for global problems. And there's an abundance of them if we have the political will to make it happen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes out of that comment for me is, when we first built our environmental center here, VOC paints were very, very expensive because public didn't know, and supply and demand was ruling the day as it does in this type of an economy. And now that more and more education has happened around volatile organic compounds, the paints are much more reasonably priced. And I think what you'll see happen as we all push into this, and if we can get some legislation passed, that the cost of some of these things will start to come down. So where we couldn't afford it before, we now can. Because I know just replacing our to-go containers here, you have to make a financial commitment to do those kinds of things.
Right.
And it's part of, not to say anything past the first 6 that you gave, but it does take that level of commitment. You do have to make, even in some ways, the financial commitment to pull this off. And I agree with you that I think it's going to be a commitment of all of us in community, working, educating, making the appropriate decisions. And I think these kinds of conversations, and a lot of what I'm seeing happening all over, is where my hope comes from. So I want to thank you, Judith, for this time. I would talk for 2 more hours, and I wish you, amazing success with your Beyond Plastics, and I look forward to personally and also as Omega intersecting with you many times in the future as we deal with the issue of plastics.
Yeah, happy to. The other thing about this issue, believe it or not, is it's fun. It's a fun issue to work on because you can see change. So everyone in the pool, and let's work with Omega and Beyond Plastics and reduce the demand of plastics. Thank you so much, Skip.
Thank you, Judith.